If you had told me last year that I would be sitting in a lonely hotel room in downtown Chicago, watching streaks of rain crawl down the window as the city lights flickered below, I probably would have laughed and asked you what movie you were watching. Back then, my life felt like something out of a film, almost too perfect, almost too glossy. The Brooks family mansion in Connecticut sat atop a green hill, its white pillars and sprawling lawns the setting for countless summer parties, charity events, and family barbecues. My mother, Helen, was always at the center of it all, her laughter echoing down the marble corridors and through the gardens. My father, Richard Brooks, was the epitome of an American success story, and he often reminded us of it. Growing up, I never really wanted for anything. I had my wing in the house, a trust fund waiting for me, and the kind of opportunities people dream of. But privilege is a strange thing. It's easy to forget how fragile it is, how quickly it can turn into a cage, especially when the walls are lined with family expectations and secrets. Maybe that's why I worked so hard, even when I didn't have to, first at Yale, then in the family company Brooks International Holdings. My younger sister, Claire, was always different. She had a softness to her, a sweetness that made everyone want to protect her. Maybe I envied that a little, her ability to float through life, with everyone's affection following her like sunlight. On the day of Claire's wedding, the house was unrecognizable. Every surface was covered with white roses, their scent thick in the warm June air. Crystal vases lined the long dining tables, each place set with gleaming silverware and heavy china. Guests in designer dresses and crisp suits mingled on the back lawn, glasses of French champagne in hand. It was the kind of wedding you read about in magazines, perfect, excessive, and beneath the surface a little unreal. I arrived early that morning, feeling oddly out of place in my own home. My dress, a deep navy silk, felt too formal, but my mother insisted. "You're the maid of honor, darling," she said as she fussed over my hair. "You have to look the part." Claire, meanwhile, was a vision. Her dress was a Vera Wang original, fitted perfectly to her small frame, the train trailing behind her like a cloud. She squeezed my hand as we waited for the ceremony to begin, her blue eyes shining with happiness and nerves. "Thank you for being here, Liv," she whispered. "I know things have been tense." She didn't say what everyone already knew. My relationship with Dad had become strained over the last year, as I pushed back on certain company decisions, questioned the way some things were run. But today, I told myself, was about Claire. The ceremony itself was beautiful. As Claire walked down the aisle to Michael Evans, a rising star in investment banking and the kind of man my father always hoped his daughters would marry, I tried to focus on the joy in the room. The vows, the music, the sound of applause as they kissed. I let myself believe, for a moment, that we were just an ordinary family celebrating a special day. Dinner was served in the grand ballroom, every table lit by the soft glow of candles. I found myself seated beside my father, who was in his element, raising toasts and making everyone laugh. He was always most alive at these events, surrounded by the power and wealth he'd worked so hard to build. As the waiters cleared the main course, Dad leaned over, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, your sister deserves something special. Something big. She and Michael need a proper start. Why don't you give them the jet?" For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. My private jet, a Gulfstream, bought just last year in my name for company travel, and one of the few things that actually felt like it belonged to me, was supposed to go to Claire? "Dad, that's my jet," I said, keeping my tone as calm as I could. "You said it was for business, that I'd need it for the expansion in California." He waved a hand, his smile brittle. "Business, pleasure, it's all the same. Claire and Michael will be traveling a lot, so you can just use one of the others." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. There was no other jet for me. Dad was just saying it because it sounded good in front of his friends from London and Paris, who sat nearby, listening with polite smiles. I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Dad. I can't. It's not fair." That was all I managed before he exploded. He stood up, so suddenly his chair scraped the marble floor, the sound ringing out above the quiet music. "You don't care about your sister, just yourself," he shouted, his voice carrying over the tables, silencing the room. "Get out." For a moment, no one moved. I felt my mother's hand clamp down on my wrist, but Dad was already reaching for me, his face red with fury. He shoved me harder than I expected. My heels slipped on the marble, and I landed hard, pain jolting up my arm and through my back. For a heartbeat, the only sound in the room was the clatter of my chair and the soft gasp of my sister. I looked up to see Claire's eyes wide with shock and fear. She started toward me, but I shook my head. I didn't want her dragged into this. Slowly, I stood, brushing off my dress, ignoring the throbbing in my wrist and the humiliation burning my cheeks. My mother whispered, "Please, Eleanor, don't make a scene." But it was too late. The scene had already been made, and I was the unwilling star. I walked out of that ballroom, past the guests who turned their heads and pretended not to stare, out through the grand foyer and into the night. The sky was dark, thunder rumbling in the distance. As I walked down the long driveway, heels sinking into the wet gravel, I realized I hadn't said a word. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just left, the sound of distant thunder and my heartbeat in my ears. At the end of the driveway, I looked back once at the glowing windows of the house where I grew up. In that moment, it felt like I was looking at someone else's life, not my own. I called a cab, gave the driver the name of a hotel in New York City, and sat in silence as we drove away from everything I had ever known. And so, that was how it began. The night my family broke apart, the night I realized that sometimes love isn't enough to keep you safe or whole or even wanted. It was the wedding that changed everything, and it was only the beginning. That night, the city felt impossibly large. I sat by the window in my hotel room on the 21st floor, my bruised arm propped up on a pillow, the lights of Manhattan glimmering far below. The wedding was over, but the anger in my father's voice still echoed inside my skull. My phone was heavy with unread messages, Claire apologizing again and again, my mother switching between concern and denial, Michael telling me not to take it personally, that Dad was under stress. I didn't answer any of them. I just watched the headlights crawl down Fifth Avenue, a slow river of gold threading its way through the sleepless city. I suppose I should have felt sadness or regret, or maybe even guilt for walking away. But what I felt was numb, like someone had flicked a switch and turned off the part of me that cared what my family thought. Maybe it was the pain in my wrist, or maybe it was years of pressure finally boiling over. All I knew was that something inside me had shifted, as if I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I wrapped myself in the hotel's plush white robe and poured a glass of water from the minibar. As I held the cold glass to my forehead, I caught sight of myself in the mirror above the desk. My makeup was smeared, my eyes red and puffy. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not the perfect daughter, not the loyal executive, just a tired, hurt woman who is running out of excuses. It's strange, the memories that rise when everything else falls away. I found myself thinking back to the first time I'd ever lied for my family. I was 19, home from college for winter break, when my father handed me a stack of papers and told me to shred them. "Just old business files, Liv," he said, too casually. Nothing important. I remember the way he smiled at me, that proud, secretive smile. I didn't ask questions then. I just did what I was told. I'd spent my entire adult life doing what I was told. But tonight was different. As I stared at the city below, I thought about the real cost of all those secrets. It wasn't just the money, or the fancy parties, or even the private jet my father had tried to give away as if it were a necklace or a bottle of wine. It was the way I'd learned to doubt myself, to wonder if my discomfort meant I was weak, or selfish, or ungrateful. I thought about all the deals I'd seen at Brooks International Holdings that didn't quite make sense, the wire transfers to shell companies in Europe, the meetings that happened late at night, the phone calls that ended as soon as I entered the room. For years, I'd convinced myself that everyone in business did it. Offshore accounts were just part of the game. But in that moment, I realized how much I'd lost by protecting my family's reputation. I'd lost my voice. I'd lost my confidence. Maybe I'd even lost my sister. My laptop was still zipped inside my purse, untouched since I'd stormed out of the wedding. I opened it, my hands trembling, and scrolled through the folder I'd kept hidden on my desktop for months, labeled, blandly, Research. Inside were PDFs, spreadsheets, and photos of documents I'd snapped with my phone late at night in the office. There were emails with strange phrases, payments to names I didn't recognize, contracts with European companies that, as far as I could tell, didn't actually exist. For a long time, I'd gathered them without knowing exactly why. Some part of me had always believed I'd use them to protect myself if things ever got truly bad. I never imagined I'd use them to burn the whole house down. It was after midnight when I remembered Laura Hayes. We'd met at a Women in Business conference in Boston the year before. She was smart, relentless, and not afraid to ask difficult questions. Over drinks, she'd confided how hard it was to find real stories, stories that mattered, that could change things. I'd laughed and told her she should come work for us. Maybe someday, she'd joked. But as I scrolled through my contacts, her name seemed to glow on the screen. I started to write an email. Then I stopped, my fingers hovering over the keys. Once I sent this, there would be no going back. My family would never forgive me. Our name would be dragged through the mud. I thought of my mother, who had always wanted her daughters to be close, and of Claire, who had just begun her new life with Michael. For a brief moment, I hesitated. I wondered if there was still time to delete everything, to erase the evidence and pretend it never happened. But the memory of my father's hands on my shoulders, the way his voice had cracked with disappointment and anger, was stronger than my fear. I opened the folder and attached everything, every file, every note, every document I'd saved. I wrote, "Laura, I have something you need to see. I'm ready to talk." I hit send before I could change my mind. The city was impossibly quiet. I closed my laptop and stood by the window, watching as a police car sped down the avenue, sirens muted by the thick glass. I wondered what Laura would say, what she would do. I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. My phone buzzed again, lighting up with new messages. "Claire, please call me Liv. I love you. My mother, you need to come home. We can fix this. Michael, let's talk. You don't have to do anything drastic." Each one was a rope, pulling me back toward the life I'd just left behind. But I didn't answer. Instead, I scrolled through the photos on my phone. Family trips to London and Paris, Christmas mornings by the fire, snapshots of Claire and me as kids, grinning with chocolate-smeared faces. For the first time, I let myself feel angry. Angry at my father for putting me in this position. Angry at myself for letting it go on so long. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I watched the dawn creep over the city, painting the buildings with gold and pink. My old life was over, and I didn't know what would happen next. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to keep their secrets anymore. As the sun rose over Manhattan, I realized that sometimes the only way out is through the truth, even if it means burning the bridges behind you. The morning after I sent everything to Laura Hayes, my world changed forever. I barely slept, lying on the stiff hotel bed, clutching my phone to my chest and waiting for a response that might never come. For a brief, desperate moment just before dawn, I almost wished I could unsend the email, erase everything, pretend it was a nightmare. But when the sun rose and a soft, gray light spilled into the room, I knew there was no going back. I had made my choice. All that was left was to see what happened next. It started quietly at first. My phone buzzed with a single message from Laura. "Got everything. Meet me at 11. Network headquarters, 52nd Street. No questions, no hesitation." It was the kind of confidence I both admired and feared. I took a long, shaky shower, scrubbed off what was left of my mascara, and tried to make myself look presentable. As I pulled my hair into a low bun and zipped my black dress, I caught sight of my bruised wrist in the mirror. It felt like a secret badge, proof that what happened at the wedding wasn't just in my head. The city was already bustling when I hailed a cab to 52nd Street. Horns blared, delivery trucks rumbled past, and everyone moved with that determined purpose only New Yorkers seem to have. I sat silently in the back seat, rehearsing what I might say, how I might tell the story I'd been keeping inside for so long. My hands shook as I signed in at the network's front desk, and by the time Laura appeared in the lobby, I felt more like a criminal than a whistleblower. She smiled, brisk but kind, and led me to a small conference room where two producers waited, shuffling papers and setting up lights. "You're doing the right thing," Laura said quietly, squeezing my arm. "Just tell the truth. Tell it all." I nodded, but my throat was tight. My voice barely worked when the cameras finally rolled. The interview itself was a blur. Laura asked her questions with surgical precision. How long had I known? What did my father say? What proof did I have? Why now? I laid everything out. The shell companies in Europe, the offshore accounts, the fake invoices, the way money moved through Brooks International Holdings like water through a sieve. They showed some of my documents on screen, highlighting signatures, wire transfers, and names I'd spent months researching. My face looked pale and tense under the studio lights. For 40 minutes, I told America what I had never dared say to anyone but myself. When the interview ended, Laura squeezed my hand again. "You're brave, Eleanor," she whispered. "You just changed your life." I left the building dizzy with exhaustion and caught another cab back to the hotel. I wanted to hide, to disappear, but I knew that was impossible now. The fallout was instant and merciless. By the time I reached my hotel, my phone was exploding with calls and texts. News alerts blared from every screen in the lobby. Eleanor Brooks exposes family fortune's dark side, scrolled across CNN, CNBC, and local stations. My inbox filled with interview requests, strangers offering support or demanding answers, distant cousins telling me to keep my mouth shut. And then came my family. Within hours, I was locked out of every company account. My Brooks International email vanished, my company credit card declined at the hotel front desk, and my access badge was deactivated. My personal bank account still worked, but a sick feeling crawled up my spine as I realized just how much of my life was tied to the family business. My mother's number flashed across my phone, over and over. I finally answered on the third call, my heart in my throat. She sounded different, her voice raw and thin. "Eleanor, what have you done?" she whispered, as if afraid the walls themselves would hear. "Your father is furious. He says you're making it all up, that you're sick. You need to come home and apologize. Please, Liv. You don't understand what you've started." Tears welled in my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "I do understand, Mom. That's why I did it." Someone had to stop it. There was a long silence on the other end, then the line went dead. I waited for Claire to call, for her name to light up on my phone. But it never did. I imagined her in her new apartment in Boston, torn between loyalty and disbelief, her world shaken as deeply as mine. The pain of her silence cut deeper than any of Dad's words. As evening fell, I drew the curtains and curled up on the bed, still in my interview clothes, the room growing darker around me. Every muscle ached. I stared at the muted TV, my face frozen mid-sentence as pundits and anchors dissected my words. They called me brave. They called me a traitor. No one called me a daughter. When the knock came, I almost didn't answer. But the pounding persisted, louder and more urgent, until I dragged myself to the door. Standing in the hallway, rain-soaked and out of breath, was Ethan. My best friend from college, who always knew when I needed him, even across state lines. He barely said a word. He just dropped his backpack and pulled me into a fierce hug. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, shaking my whole body. I let myself cry for everything, for the family I'd lost, for the years of lies, for the possibility that I might never go home again. Ethan didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He just held me, his steady heartbeat anchoring me to something real as the storm outside battered the windows. For hours, we sat on the bed, side by side, saying little. When my sobs finally faded, I leaned on his shoulder and tried to breathe, to believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd done the right thing. As midnight came and went, I thought about the Connecticut house, with its manicured lawns and rose gardens, and the memory of my childhood laughter echoing through the halls. I picture my father's face, cold and unreadable, on the TV screen. I thought about all the money, millions of dollars, built on secrets and shadows, suddenly weightless, as if it had never been mine at all. Yet underneath the sorrow, the loss, the gnawing guilt, there was something else. Relief. I had carried my family's lies for too long, let them shape every decision, every relationship, every dream I'd ever had. Now, for better or worse, I was free. Free from the pressure to be perfect, to be loyal at any cost, to keep secrets that threatened to consume me. The price was high. I wasn't sure yet if I could pay it. But as the night gave way to morning, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The life I had left behind in Connecticut was gone, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I ever wanted it back. The weeks after the interview felt both endless and impossibly quick. It was as if my old life was dissolving grain by grain, even as a new one tried to take root in unfamiliar soil. Every morning, I woke in my small Chicago apartment, sunlight pooling on the hardwood floors, the sounds of the city humming below my windows. The air was different here, sharper somehow, and I was different too, softer around the edges but harder inside, where it mattered most. My first night in Chicago was a blur of cardboard boxes and restless pacing. The apartment was nothing like the Connecticut mansion I'd left behind. There was no marble foyer, no sweeping staircase, no view of endless green lawns. Instead, there was a view of Lake Michigan, its surface steel blue and rippling, the waves catching the light like silver coins. My apartment was tiny, a studio, with one wobbly table, a mattress on the floor, and windows that rattled in the wind. But it was mine, paid for with money from my own story, not the Brooks name. The network's check wasn't a fortune, just enough for a deposit, a few months' rent, and the promise that, at last, I could choose what happened next. The adjustment wasn't easy. Some days, the loneliness pressed in like a storm cloud. I missed Claire most of all. I missed her soft laugh, the way she used to steal my sweaters, the times we'd snuck out to the pond in the backyard just to escape another Brooks dinner party. I missed my mother, too. Even though her calls had become less frequent and more strained, her words brittle, tinged with confusion and sadness. My father never called. Not once. If he thought of me at all, it was probably only in the context of damage control and legal strategy. The FBI agents who showed up at my door wore serious faces and dark suits, their questions crisp and methodical. I gave them everything, the documents, the emails, the memories I'd carried like stones in my pockets. I was offered protection more than once, new addresses, private security, lawyers on retainer. I considered it, but in the end, I chose a simpler kind of safety. I changed my number, stopped checking the news every hour, and let the headlines fade into background noise. My story was public now, spun and analyzed and argued over in newsrooms and courtrooms, far away from my quiet apartment. I learned to tune it out, to let the past recede with every sunrise. Most mornings, I laced up my sneakers and ran along the lake. The path was always crowded, joggers, cyclists, couples with dogs, and strollers. No one recognized me here. No one whispered behind their hands or looked at me with either awe or disgust. I was just another woman, breath fogging in the morning air, feet pounding the pavement, eyes fixed on the water. I drank cheap coffee from a paper cup instead of champagne. I ate bagels instead of caviar. Sometimes, I thought about how much of my old life was built on appearances, on the need to seem happy and successful even when I was anything but. After those runs, I'd come home, shower, and sit at my little table to write. At first, it was just journaling, a way to empty my mind, to try and make sense of everything that had happened. But as the weeks passed, the pages filled up with more than memories. I wrote about my family, yes, but also about my own mistakes, my own failings, about the choices I made, the people I hurt, the times I chose silence when I should have spoken up. Writing became a kind of therapy, a way to chart a path through the wreckage. People reached out, some with kindness, others with anger. Former friends from Yale and old colleagues from the company sent emails, some supportive, others bitter or bewildered. I learned quickly who had truly cared about me and who had only cared about the Brooks name. There were messages from strangers, too. A young woman from Dallas wrote to say she admired my courage, that she was thinking of standing up to her father. An older man from California sent a long, rambling note about corporate corruption and the need for more women like you. But there were hateful messages too, people accusing me of being a traitor, of destroying my family for fame, or money, or revenge. For a while, every notification made my heart race, but eventually, I stopped reading them altogether. One gray morning, a message from Claire finally arrived. It was short, typed at 2:13 a.m. "You did what you had to do," she wrote. "I'm proud of you. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you at the wedding. I love you." I sat with those words for a long time, my hands shaking, tears running down my face. I wrote back, simply, "I love you, too. I'm always here." There was nothing else to say, not yet, but I believed, deep down, that we'd find our way back to each other in time. The months slipped by, marked by little victories and setbacks. The legal cases against Brooks International Holdings moved forward. There were hearings, depositions, and news segments I didn't watch. My mother sent a birthday card and signed, but I recognized her handwriting. I kept it in a drawer with my old Yale ID and a faded photograph of Claire and me at the pond. Sometimes I still dreamed about the house in Connecticut, the white roses blooming in the garden, the taste of summer peaches on the porch, the sound of my father's voice calling us in for dinner. In those dreams, everything was golden and perfect, untouched by lies or betrayal. But when I woke, I remembered the truth, and I felt a kind of peace I'd never known before. I started to build a new life, slowly, imperfectly, but with intention. I volunteered at a local women's shelter, using my business skills to help women rebuild their own lives. I made new friends, tentative at first, then real. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet, how to budget for groceries, and how to be alone without being lonely. I stopped measuring my worth by the size of my bank account or the number of invitations on my calendar. America is a big country, full of second chances and new beginnings. The money in my account was no longer Brooks' money. It was my own, earned, not inherited. Whether in dollars or pounds, it didn't matter. What mattered was the freedom that came with it, the freedom to choose who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Some nights, I sat by my window, watching the city lights flicker across the water. I thought about the girl I'd been, the dutiful daughter, the loyal sister, the silent witness to secrets I could never unsee. I thought about the woman I was becoming, the one who had finally found her voice, even when it cost her everything. I didn't know what the future would hold, or if the scars would ever fully fade. But I knew this much. For the first time in my life, I was living my own story, and that, I decided, was enough.